The morning light filtering through the tall windows of courtroom 12 carried a quiet, almost reverent stillness. One of those silences that felt too heavy for an ordinary Tuesday. Dust drifted in slow spirals, catching thin bands of sunlight, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Rows of polished benches sat untouched, except for a few spectators waiting for the next case. And near the defense table, standing alone in immaculate marine dress blues, was Colonel Helena Vaughn. Her posture was perfect, chin-level spine straight, every ribbon aligned with military precision. But beneath that discipline was a subtle tremor running through her breath. She hid it well. Most people would never notice. But one man did. Across the room, leaning quietly on a broom handle near the paneled back wall, Kane Hale paused mid-sweep. To anyone else, he was just the janitor, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a plain green work uniform, hair pulled back loosely behind his ears. He moved with the calm, grounded presence of someone accustomed to silence, someone who didn't need attention to know who he was. But the way he watched Helena was different. Not curious. Not judgmental, just aware, like he recognized something in her that the rest of the world missed. At the prosecutor's table, Harper Knox, sharp-jawed, confident, and far too relaxed for the gravity of the moment, adjusted his tie and glanced impatiently at the empty seat beside Helena. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice slicing through the stillness. "The defense counsel has failed to appear. Again." Helena drew a breath, but didn't speak. Her attorney, her former attorney it now seemed, had sent a 2-line text. "15 minutes earlier, I'm withdrawing. Do not contact me. No explanation, no apology, no chance to prepare. Just abandonment." The judge adjusted his glasses and frowned. "Colonel Vaughn is your counsel on the way." "No, Your Honor." Her voice was crisp, steady, trained. But Kane saw the flicker in her eyes. No Marine, no matter how seasoned, should stand alone like this. Knox rose, eager to seize the opening. Given the absence of representation, the state moves for an immediate default ruling and permission to enter all evidence uncontested. The words struck the room like a dropped gavel. A default ruling against a decorated Marine officer with 22 years of service, without a single voice raised on her behalf. Kane felt something pull tight in his chest. Not anger, he had learned long ago to control that. It was something deeper, something old. The echo of another courtroom, another uniform betrayed by the system, meant to protect it. He lowered his eyes, gripping the broom handle, as if grounding himself. The judge cleared his throat. "Colonel Vaughn, without counsel present. I am required to." And that was the moment Helena's breath faltered. Just barely. Just enough for someone who understood the weight of silence to hear it. Kane's jaw tightened. He looked at Helena. The rigid shoulders, the brave stillness, the quiet humiliation she refused to show. He thought of Violet, his daughter, who always asked him why grown-ups never helped each other the way children did. "Because adults forget they're allowed to," he used to answer. But he wasn't about to forget today. He set the broom down, deliberately. For a second, the soft clatter was the loudest sound in the room. Every head turned. Kane stepped forward once, then again, until he stood at the center aisle. No longer a background figure, no longer invisible. The fluorescent lights caught the cut of his shoulders, the seriousness in his eyes. Something in his presence shifted as though the room sensed a boundary line being crossed. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of stone. "She's not without counsel." Helena's head snapped up. Knox scoffed, half laughing. "What is this?" "The janitor wants to file a motion," Kane ignored him completely. He took another step toward the defense table, posture changing subtly, less like a laborer, more like a man stepping back into a world he once knew intimately. "I will defend her," Kane said louder this time. The words landed with such quiet certainty that even the judge froze. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Helena stared, confusion etched into her features. She had never seen him before today. She had no idea who he was. And yet something in his eyes, an unspoken steadiness, made her breath settle for the first time all morning. The judge blinked. "Sir, you are Kane Hale," he replied simply. "Former military legal defense. 15 years experience. My credentials are still valid under federal provisional code." He paused, letting the truth settle. "And I'm requesting immediate temporary representation for Colonel Vaughn, pending verification." Knox sputtered, clearly caught off guard. "This is absurd." "Your Honor, this man is a janitor." "He doesn't," Kane finally turned to him, gaze sharp as a scalpel. "Counselor Knox," he said quietly, "you should know better than anyone that uniforms don't determine competence." A faint, stunned laughter rippled from the gallery. The judge exhaled slowly, studying Kane with renewed interest. "Mr. Hale, this is highly irregular." "Yes, Your Honor," Kane replied. "So is abandoning a Marine officer without counsel minutes before a ruling." That did it. The courtroom changed, subtle, but undeniable. People sat up straighter. Helena's shoulders eased the smallest fraction. Even the judge's expression softened, touched by something like respect. Helena swallowed her voice, nearly a whisper. "Why? Why would you do this?" Kane turned toward her, not with pity but recognition. "Because no one," he said, "softly deserves to stand alone in a fight this large." The judge cleared his throat. "Very well, Mr. Hale, pending verification of your credentials. The motion for default is denied. Court will recess for 15 minutes. Colonel Vaughn, you may confer with your new counsel." Knox dropped into his chair, furious. Helena lowered herself into her seat, slowly, still stunned. Kane stepped beside her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Colonel," he said, unfolding the case file with a practiced motion that didn't belong to a janitor at all, "I need you to tell me everything they refuse to listen to." For the first time all morning, Helena Vaughn allowed herself to breathe, and for the first time in years, Kane Hale felt himself stepping back into a battle he had sworn he would never fight again. But some battles, some people were worth breaking promises for. The consultation room adjacent to courtroom 12B was barely larger than a storage closet. 4 walls painted an indifferent beige, a single rectangular table, and 2 metal chairs that carried the creak of long use. But for Helena Vaughn, it felt like the first safe harbor she had seen in months. Kane Hale closed the door softly, almost ceremonially, as though sealing the chaos of the courtroom on the other side. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Helena, still in her marine dress blues, stood rigidly by the table, hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles blanched. Kane remained by the door, assessing her with a measured calm, not prying, not pitying. Just present. "You saved me in there," she finally said, her voice low-edged with something raw she tried to suppress. "And I don't even know who you are." Kane moved to the table and set the file folder down. His movements were unhurried, precise, a familiarity that didn't belong to a janitor's routine. When he looked up, his eyes held a kind of steady gravity that made Helena's breath catch. "You will," he said. "But first I need to understand what they're trying to bury." Helena inhaled, bracing herself. "The charges, the evidence, it all came out of nowhere." "I didn't." Kane raised a hand gently. "I believe you. But belief isn't enough inside a courtroom. We need facts, not fear. The word fear made her jaw tighten. Marines weren't supposed to fear anything. Not battle, not injury, not death. Yet the humiliation she had felt in that courtroom, standing alone, abandoned, had pierced deeper than any wound she'd sustained in combat. She nodded once. "Ask what you need to ask." Kane opened the folder. His fingers brushed the edges of the documents with the reflexive skill of someone who had once lived inside such files. He scanned quickly, too quickly for someone new to the case. Helena watched his eyes move across the pages, sharp and certain, detecting patterns she hadn't even considered. After less than a minute, he murmured, "This is inconsistent." Helena blinked. "What is?" He tapped a page. "Your deployment schedule shows you were in Okinawa on the date they claim you leaked restricted training protocols. Yet the email address they tied to you logs in from Arlington 5 minutes before the breach." "That's what I tried to explain," Helena said, frustration rising. "But no one would listen. They said the metadata could be spoofed. They said I must have used a proxy." Kane shook his head slowly. "No, this isn't spoofing. It's fabrication." Helena stared. "How can you tell?" "Because I've seen it before." Silence folded into the room. Quiet, heavy, expectant. Then Helena spoke softly, cautiously. "Kane, who are you?" He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting not to the papers, but to some distant moment only he could see. When he finally answered, his voice carried the weight of a past deliberately buried. "I used to be part of JAG, Judge Advocate General Corps," he said. "Military defense. I handled court-martials. Intelligence breaches, misconduct hearings. Big cases. Cases that made people nervous." Helena's breath hitched. "What happened?" Kane looked down at his hands. Strong, steady hands that had once held the reputations and futures of countless soldiers. "I did my job too well," he said, with a faint, humorless exhale. "I uncovered an internal operation siphoning funds through falsified training contracts. It reached higher than they expected. When I pushed, they pushed back harder." Helena felt something inside her shift. Something warm. Something painfully familiar. "You were punished for telling the truth." Kane nodded once. "They couldn't court-martial me. Too clean a record. Too many people knew me. So they dismantled my career piece by piece, removed my clearance, reassigned me, stalled my promotions. Eventually, my daughter needed stability more than I needed to keep proving a point. So I left." Helena swallowed. She had worn her own battles in silence for years, hiding bruises left not by enemies on the battlefield, but by allies in conference rooms and chain-of-command offices. "Why janitorial work?" she asked quietly. Kane's lips twitched in a soft half-smile, the kind that held more truth than humor. "It's honest, simple, no politics, and it lets me be near Violet when she's out of school." Helena nodded slowly. She understood more than she wished she did. People like Kane didn't choose quiet lives. They retreated into them when the world grew too cruel. Kane returned to the file. "Colonel Vaughn. These documents, they weren't just collected. They were curated. Someone wanted to build a narrative that couldn't be disproven." Helena sat down across from him. The metal chair groaned faintly under her weight. There were signs, she admitted quietly. Small things at first. A briefing I wasn't invited to. A report rewritten without my approval. A superior officer who suddenly stopped returning my calls. Kane listened with absolute focus. His kind of listening, Helena realized, wasn't passive. It was strategic, absorbing every detail, sorting truth from noise. "When did the accusations begin?" he asked. 3 months ago, Helena replied. Internal Affairs confronted me with so-called evidence. They said I could resign quietly or let the investigation proceed. And your lawyer, Helena, looked away. Shame flickered across her expression. He said a plea deal was my best chance, that no one beats accusations like these. 2 nights ago, he stopped responding. And this morning, he abandoned you. Kane finished for her. The word struck a nerve, sharp, unforgiving. Yes, she whispered. For a moment, Kane didn't speak. He simply studied her, the stiff shoulders, the precision of her uniform, the cracks she refused to show. Colonel, he said gently, you've been set up, intentionally, methodically, and the speed of the collapse around you tells me this isn't the work of one prosecutor or one investigator. Helena's pulse quickened. Then whose work is it? Kane turned a page, revealing a name that appeared repeatedly in the periphery of the documents, never directly involved, but always near the shadows of the evidence trail. Curtis Vance Kane said, a private contractor, power reach, and a history of manipulating outcomes. Helena stared at the name. Her jaw tightened. If he's behind this, then I'm already in deeper trouble than I imagined. Kane closed the file. Maybe he said, but you're not alone anymore. Helena met his gaze. In that moment, the soldier in her, the part trained to stand alone, began to fracture, not in weakness, but in relief. Kane stood, offering his hand. Let's go back in there. We have a fight ahead of us, and I intend to win it. Helena inhaled deeply. For the first time in months, her breath didn't tremble. All right, Mr. Hale, she said softly. Let's fight. Courtroom 12B felt different when Kane and Helena stepped back inside. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere had shifted, like a room that had expected a storm and instead received a quiet resolve it couldn't quite predict. The small murmur of the spectators quieted as the two took their seats, and Harper Knox, already on his feet, turned with a look of theatrical annoyance that barely concealed a deeper discomfort. Kane didn't acknowledge him. He didn't need to. Instead, he opened the case file again, sliding a few pages aside with silent speed, the way someone does when their mind is 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Helena watched him, her breath steadier, the weight of abandonment replaced with something she had nearly forgotten existed: hope. When the judge returned to the bench, Knox immediately sprang into motion. Your Honor, I'd like to renew my objection to this individual representing the defendant. This is irregular, unverified, and frankly, Counselor Knox. The judge interrupted. We will review his credentials shortly. In the meantime, you may proceed. A small, restrained smile touched the corner of Kane's mouth, barely noticeable, unless someone was looking for it. Helena noticed. It wasn't arrogance. It was recognition of a rule he expected the judge to follow: fairness first. Knox inhaled sharply, smoothing his tie. Very well. The state calls its first witness. A man in a gray suit walked stiffly to the stand. Staff Sergeant Rylan Moore, one of Helena's former subordinates. He avoided her gaze entirely, staring instead at the floor. Helena felt a tightness coil in her chest. She had once trusted him. She had recommended him for a leadership program. Kane, watching more closely, sensed the tension, but didn't comment. Knox approached the witness with self-assured steps. Sergeant Moore, did you personally observe Colonel Vaughn accessing restricted training protocols on March 11th? Moore swallowed. Yes, sir. She told me to leave the room, but I saw her open the files before I stepped out. Knox nodded, as though the answer had been inevitable. And to be clear, these files are classified, yes. Yes, sir. The judge scribbled notes. Knox turned just slightly toward Kane, letting triumph show in his eyes. It was premature. Kane remained still, hands lightly folded, eyes steady. "Your witness, Knox," said, stepping back with a smug flourish. Kane rose slowly, unthreateningly, but with the controlled presence of a man accustomed to having his questions obeyed. He approached the witness stand without a single page of notes. "Sergeant Moore," he began. Voice gentle, "Thank you for your testimony." Moore shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir. You said you observed Colonel Vaughn opening restricted files before she asked you to leave." "Yes." Kane tilted his head, studying him. "How long were you in the room after she began accessing them?" Moore blinked. "Maybe a few seconds." "A few seconds," Kane repeated thoughtfully. "Were you close enough to see the screen?" Moore hesitated. Knox tensed. "Not exactly, but I knew what was happening." "Of course," Kane said with a courteous nod. "You assumed." Moore stiffened. "No, sir. I saw her." "From where exactly?" Kane gently interrupted. "The corner of the room where the equipment lockers partially block the workstation, or from beside the door?" When you were already moving to leave, Moore's face paled. Helena felt her heart pound. Kane had never been in that room yet. Somehow he knew its layout. Moore stammered, "I don't recall exactly." Kane leaned slightly forward, not threatening, but commanding. "Sergeant, do you recall telling Internal Affairs that you suspected her of accessing those files, but you did not directly witness it?" Knox shot up. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said calmly. Moore swallowed again. I was under pressure when they questioned me. Pressure." Kane echoed, from whom Moore looked down. "I don't know." But Kane knew a deflection when he heard one. "Sergeant, do you recall receiving an offer for early advancement 3 days before making your statement against Colonel Vaughn?" The room went still. Knox froze mid-breath. Helena's eyes widened. Moore's voice cracked. I don't know what you're talking about." Kane stepped back slightly, giving Moore space. "I'll be simple, Sergeant. Did you knowingly provide incomplete or exaggerated testimony because someone hinted your cooperation would be rewarded?" Moore's throat bobbed. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, "Yes," he whispered. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Knox's face drained of color. The judge looked up sharply. Kane's tone remained soft, almost compassionate. "Thank you for being honest. That will be all." Moore stepped down, shame alive in every movement. Helena watched him go, not with vengeance, but with profound sadness. Her integrity had meant everything to her, and it had been manipulated so quickly, so brutally. Knox stumbled to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular, and the defense counselor." Knox, the judge, cut in. "Your witness appears to have admitted to providing compromised testimony. You may proceed with your next witness, but I suggest you carefully consider the quality of your evidence." Kane returned to the defense table. Helena leaned toward him, voice low and controlled. "How did you know all of that?" Kane didn't look up as he adjusted the papers. "Because people under pressure make predictable mistakes," he said quietly. "Those who fabricate stories always leave the seams visible." Then he did look at her, straight into her eyes, calm and unwavering. "And because I've seen this pattern before, more times than I can count." Helena searched his expression. "Are you saying this is bigger than Sergeant Moore?" Kane nodded once. "I'm saying Moore was the easiest thread to pull, and whoever orchestrated this didn't expect anyone to tug at it." For the first time, Helena felt the scope of the conspiracy tightening around her, not like a noose, but like a map beginning to reveal its borders. Knox hurried to call another witness, but the damage had been done. The spectators whispered. The judge watched Kane with interest, and Helena, steadier now, sat taller. Kane had not simply defended her. He had changed the direction of the entire case. As the next witness approached the stand, Kane leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with quiet resolve. "Colonel," he murmured, "this was only the first blow. The pushback will come." Helena inhaled slowly, and when it does, a faint smile touched his lips, a soldier's smile tempered by battles long past. Then Kane said softly, "We push harder." The afternoon sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the courthouse steps by the time Kane and Helena emerged from the building. A brisk autumn wind swept through the plaza, stirring fallen leaves in restless spirals. The tension of the courtroom still clung to Helena's shoulders, coiling there like a weight she couldn't shake off. Kane felt it too. He didn't show it, not in the dramatic way other men might, but in the quiet tightening of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows. For all his calm in the courtroom, he carried the signs of a mind already processing the next steps, mapping out a battle that was far from over. Helena walked a few paces behind him, her breath visible in the cooling air. The victory, if it could be called that, felt fragile. A single exposed lie did not topple a conspiracy. It merely irritated the people who built it, and irritated enemies were often the most dangerous. Kane paused at the bottom of the courthouse staircase, turning slightly, as if sensing her thoughts. "You did well today," he said. Helena let out a humorless breath. "I didn't do anything." "You stood your ground," Kane corrected gently. "Sometimes that's the hardest part." Before she could respond, a small voice called out across the plaza. Dad, a girl no older than 8, bounded toward them, dark hair bouncing a lavender backpack shaped like a cartoon fox, jiggling with every step. Her eyes bright and warm, like summer sunlight, immediately softened something in Kane's posture. Violet Hale. She reached him, throwing her arms around his waist. Kane bent down, folding her into an embrace, so natural, so instinctive. Helena felt the sight settle deep in her chest. "You're late today," Violet said, releasing him just enough to look up at his face. "I waited outside the library forever." "Not forever," Kane said, with a gentle smile. 10 minutes tops." Violet grinned. "Only 8. Then, noticing Helena for the first time, her smile faltered. She looked at the Marine colonel, at the pristine uniform, the stiff posture, the exhaustion in her eyes, and said something Helena did not expect. "Are you okay?" Helena blinked. Children rarely looked at her like that. Adults never did. But this little girl seemed to see straight through the ribbons and medals to something deeper. "I'm fine," Helena replied, forcing a steadiness into her voice. Violet didn't buy it. Children rarely fell for adult rehearsed answers. She stepped closer, clutching the straps of her fox backpack. "You look like you're scared," she said softly, "but you're trying really hard not to be." The words hit Helena with startling precision. She swallowed hard. Kane's gaze flicked briefly to her apologetic, though he had nothing to apologize for. Violet Kane murmured, "That's enough." But Violet shook her head. "It's not bad, Dad. Sometimes people need someone to stand with them." Helena stared at the girl, this small, earnest child, who voiced with innocent clarity what Helena herself had struggled to admit. The tightness in her chest shifted, loosening just enough for air to move freely. "Your father," Helena began softly. "He stood with me today." "I know," Violet said proudly. "Dad always helps people when they're hurting, even when he pretends he doesn't." Kane let out a slow, resigned sigh. "Violet." But Helena couldn't help a faint smile, a fragile, barely there curve of her lips that surprised even her. "She's observant," Helena murmured. "Very observant." "Too observant," Kane muttered. Violet tugged gently at Helena's sleeve. Are people being mean to you? The question was simple, pure, but it carved straight through Helena's defenses. Yes, Helena answered honestly. Some people are. Violet nodded solemnly. The seriousness of a child who understood more than adults assumed. That's why you shouldn't be alone. Dad says people are strongest when someone believes in them. Kane froze. Helena looked at him. But Violet wasn't finished. She looked up at her father again. Dad, are you going to help her? Kane exhaled slowly, brushing a hand over Violet's hair. I already am. And you won't stop, she pressed. Helena felt her breath hold. Kane met his daughter's gaze, the gaze of someone who had been his reason for every sacrifice, every quiet battle, every rebuilt life choice. Then he looked at Helena, and something unmistakable passed between them, a vow he hadn't yet spoken aloud. No, he said softly, I won't stop. Violet beamed. Good. She needs you. The word struck Helena deeper than she could have prepared for. She had spent her entire career proving she needed no one, that she could stand alone. That strength meant solitude and certainty. But Violet's innocence revealed a truth she had been fighting against for months. She was tired, she was hurting, and she didn't want to stand alone anymore. Kane cleared his throat and stood straighter. Violet, how about we let Colonel Vaughn get some rest? She's had a difficult day. Violet nodded, then reached into her fox backpack. She pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, crinkled at the edges, decorated with hearts in 3 different shades of purple. For you, she said, offering it to Helena. Helena hesitated. What is it, a good luck picture? Violet replied. I only make them for people who look like they're carrying heavy things. Kane sighed again. Violet, we've talked about boundaries, but Helena slowly knelt, lowering herself until she was eye level with the girl. Thank you, she whispered. When she opened the paper, she saw a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. A tall man, a small girl, and a uniformed woman with medals. Helena inhaled sharply, not because of the simplicity, but because of the hope it carried. She looked at Kane. He looked at the ground, clearly embarrassed. But Violet, grinning, simply said, You're not alone anymore. Helena's voice caught in her throat. I suppose I'm not. As Kane gently guided his daughter toward their car, he turned back to Helena one last time. In his expression wasn't pity. It was quiet understanding. Get some rest, Colonel, he said softly. Tomorrow, the real fight begins. Helena watched them walk away. A father and daughter, who in less than an hour had managed to light a warmth inside her, she thought long extinguished. Maybe Violet was right. Maybe strength didn't always mean standing alone. And maybe, just maybe, this quiet, unexpected connection would be the first thread of hope, strong enough to pull her out of the shadows, threatening to consume her life. The diner sat on the corner of Fairfax and Monroe, a humble little place with red vinyl booths, steaming coffee, and the kind of warm yellow lighting that softened the harsh edges of a long day. Kane chose it deliberately. It wasn't fancy, wasn't loud, and most importantly, it was the kind of place where people talked without feeling watched. Helena Vaughn slid into the booth across from him, her marine posture impossibly straight, despite the exhaustion in her eyes. She had changed out of her uniform. Now she wore a simple gray sweater over dark jeans. Somehow she looked more vulnerable this way, and more real. Kane arrived with 2 mugs of coffee. You take it black, he said, placing one in front of her. Helena blinked, surprised. How did you know you strike me as someone who doesn't dilute anything? Kane replied, seating himself. Helena gave a quiet huff of amusement. Fair enough. For a moment they sat in silence, the hum of the diner wrapping around them. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the cold night. Finally, Kane opened the folder he'd brought. I dug deeper into your case on the way here. There are things that don't add up more than we saw earlier. Helena folded her hands around the warm mug. I suspected as much. Kane tapped a document. This training protocol you were accused of leaking it was revised 3 days after the timestamp. They claim you accessed it. Helena frowned. Meaning the version they say I leaked didn't even exist yet. Kane nodded. Which makes the accusation impossible, but whoever built the case assumed no one would scrutinize the timeline. Helena exhaled slowly. Sloppy. No, Kane corrected softly. Bold. People don't bother covering their tracks when they believe no one will question them. Helena looked away, jaw tightening. That sounds about right. Kane flipped to the next page. There's more. A fragment of a missing email from your account, a message that would have exonerated you. It was deleted at the server level. Helena stared at him. Impossible. Not without administrator access, Kane finished. Exactly. She swallowed hard. So someone on the inside removed it. Someone with authority, Kane said. Or someone with enough leverage to acquire authority. He slid a printed list toward her. Helena studied the names senior officers, compliance administrators, and 3 names she didn't recognize. Curtis Vance, she said quietly, pointing to one of the unknown names. Kane nodded. He appears repeatedly in indirect references, funding approvals, logistics transfers, oversight committees, never center stage, but always close enough to influence outcomes. Helena felt a chill crawl across her skin. Vance is a civilian contractor. Why would he care about a marine protocol breach? Kane watched her carefully. You tell me. Did you cross paths with him? Helena searched her memory before shaking her head. Not directly, but I turned down a proposal last year from one of the companies under his umbrella. They wanted to implement a cost-cutting measure in training simulations. I wrote a report saying it jeopardized troop safety. Kane's brow lifted. Did your report cost them money millions? Helena said simply. Kane let out a low whistle. Then this isn't about evidence. It's about payback. Helena looked down at her coffee, a storm gathering behind her eyes. I've spent my entire career teaching Marines to uphold integrity. I never thought standing by it would make me a target. It always does, Kane said softly. The moment you refuse to bend, someone tries to break you. Helena held his gaze. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Kane didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. His silence told her everything, the battles he'd fought, the ones he'd lost, and the ones he'd walked away from to protect, the only thing that mattered, his daughter. Helena leaned back. What else did you find? Kane pulled out a flash drive. Audio logs, or rather missing segments of audio logs. Someone scrubbed 8 minutes from a communication line tied to your unit. Helena stiffened. 8 minutes is a long time. Long enough to issue an illegal order? Kane said. Or arrange a setup. She drew a slow breath. I've suspected for months something was off. Reports routed around me. Complaints forwarded without my review. A training mishap pinned on me before I even arrived at the scene. Her voice hardened. They were isolating me. Setting me up. Kane nodded. That's how it starts. Quiet. Strategic. You're cut out of loops, denied access, undermined in small ways, until the moment they strike, and you have no allies left. Helena lowered her gaze. I didn't see it. You weren't supposed to, Kane said gently. That's how professionals hide a takedown. A weary silence stretched between them. Then, Helena looked up, voice softer. Why are you helping me, Kane, truly? He held her eyes unflinching. Because what they're doing to you, someone once did to me. They nearly destroyed my life, my career, my reputation, and I refuse to let my daughter grow up believing her father was the villain someone else painted him to be. He exhaled. I can't change what happened to me, but I can damn well stop it from happening to someone else. Helena's throat tightened. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then her voice broke just slightly. Thank you. Kane gave a single nod and opened another file. We're not done yet. He laid out several pages photocopies of original documents overlaid with later edits. Some signatures mismatched. Some paragraphs subtly shifted in meaning. Some timestamps altered by seconds, but seconds that made all the difference. This, Kane said, tapping a specific line is not a mistake. It's a deliberate orchestration. Helena felt her pulse quicken. How far do you think this goes? Kane leaned in, lowering his voice. Far enough that you need to understand the stakes. This isn't just about ruining your career, it's about protecting someone else's power, someone who believes they're untouchable. Helena clenched her fist, slowly grounding herself. And what do we do? Kane didn't hesitate. We find the one person who knows the truth but was too afraid to speak. Helena frowned. Kane slid forward the last page, an administrative log, with a name circled in red. Hannah Keene. Helena inhaled sharply. She was with my unit. She testified against me. She lied, Kane said calmly. And lies under pressure eventually crack. Helena's eyes darkened with something between pain and determination. If she knows something, she needs to come forward. Kane nodded. And she will. Fear only lasts until guilt outweighs it. Helena stared at the name a long time. Finally, she whispered, So this is where the real fight begins. Kane met her gaze, steady, unwavering, resolute. No, Colonel. This is where we uncover what hides behind the uniform. Outside the diner window, the neon light flickered again, its glow sharp, restless. The darkness was shifting, and someone out there had just felt the first tug on a thread they'd never intended to be pulled. Rain fell hard that night, sharp wind-driven sheets that rattled against windows and turned streetlights into blurry halos. Kane stood at his kitchen counter, rinsing out Violet's lunchbox, while she hummed softly in the living room, building a tower of colored blocks. The house was small, but warm. Its quiet simplicity, a sanctuary he had constructed piece by piece after leaving the military. Helena's file lay open on the table beside him, pages marked with notes in his clean, deliberate handwriting. He wasn't supposed to care this much, not this early, not this deeply. But the deeper he dug, the more familiar the patterns became. Fabricated evidence, missing logs, redirected reports. A target isolated until she collapsed. He'd seen it all before. He'd lived it. A sudden knock tore through the sound of the storm, 3 sharp raps, frantic and uneven. Kane froze. This wasn't a neighborly knock. It carried panic urgency. Fear. He wiped his hands and moved toward the door quietly. Instinct rising in him like muscle memory. He checked the side window first. Shadows blurred by rain, but a silhouette stood there, small and trembling. When he opened the door, Hannah Keene nearly fell inside, her hair plastered to her forehead, clothes soaked through. Breathing ragged, she clutched a satchel against her chest, as though it were the only thing holding her upright. Kane Hale. She gasped. Violet peeked around the corner, eyes wide. Kane responded instantly, his voice steady, but soft. Come in. He guided her inside, shutting the door firmly against the storm. When Hannah finally found her breath, she looked around the room at the small couch, the framed picture of Kane and Violet at the beach, the soft lamplight. Something about the space seemed to break her. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. Kane nodded once. Start from the beginning. But Hannah didn't speak. Not yet. She stared at Violet with guilt so raw it made her face twist. Sweetheart, Kane said gently, go to your room for a little bit. All right, Violet nodded, but not before she gave Hannah a sympathetic look. Children always sensed pain before adults admitted it. When Violet's door clicked shut, Hannah sagged into the nearest chair, her hands shaking violently. She doesn't deserve this, Hannah said, voice cracking. Colonel Vaughn, she doesn't deserve any of it. Kane sat across from her, calm as still water. Tell me what you know. Hannah's breath shuddered. Tears clung to her lashes. I lied. Her hands covered her face. I lied on the stand. I lied in my report. I lied because I was told to. Because they said if I didn't, something would happen to my family. Kane didn't react outwardly. He had expected sooner or later the truth would find its way to him. But hearing it always carried a different weight. Who threatened you? He asked. Hannah shook her head. I never met him directly, but everyone knew whose orders it was. Curtis Vance. His people approached me weeks before the investigation started. They said Helena was a problem, and that if I wanted to keep my career and keep my husband's job safe, I needed to cooperate. Her voice trembled. I thought it would be something small, a misfiled report, a discrepancy, nothing serious. But then they gave me a script. Kane leaned forward. A script. Hannah nodded miserably. 3 talking points, all false, all designed to make Helena look unstable and reckless. She dug through her satchel with shaking hands and pulled out a crumpled sheet typed directives, highlighted sections, exact phrases she was instructed to use. Kane's jaw tightened. Fear wasn't what moved people to betray one another. It was the threat that fear would spread to the people they loved. And your testimony today? Kane asked. Why come now? Hannah's hands wrapped tightly around the satchel strap. Because I heard what Sergeant Moore said in court. I knew it would come back on me eventually. And because I saw Helena on the stand. Her voice cracked. She looked so alone. She always protected us. She would have gone to war for any one of us. And I helped bury her. Kane let the silence sit. Not punishing. Not harsh. Simply waiting. Finally, he asked, what's in the bag? Hannah. Her breath caught. Very slowly, she unzipped it. Inside was a portable drive. Metallic cold. Valuable. I stole this, she whispered. Or copied it. I shouldn't have been able to, but I kept a backup before they wiped the internal logs. It has communication records, orders, payment trails, enough to connect Vance to the operation. She swallowed hard, and enough to clear Helena completely. Kane reached out his hand steady. May I? Hannah nodded, placing the drive gently in his palm, as though handing him the last of her courage. Kane set it on the table and looked at her with quiet clarity. You did the right thing by coming here. Hannah shook her head, tears spilling over. No, I did the right thing too late. No, Kane corrected softly. You did it now. He paused. That's when it matters. For a moment, Hannah sobbed, helpless, ashamed, overwhelmed. Kane didn't touch her, didn't offer platitudes. He simply remained present. Sometimes that was the only anchor a drowning person needed. When she could breathe again, Hannah whispered, Will they come after me? Kane's expression turned steel hard in an instant. The protector beneath the quiet man stepped forward. Not while you're under my roof. The certainty in his voice made Hannah's trembling finally ease. From the hallway, Violet peeked out her small face full of concern. Kane beckoned her gently, and she padded over in her socks, looking between them. "Is she sad?" Violet asked softly. "Yes," Kane said. Violet approached Hannah, offering her a tissue from her pocket, a simple gesture that nearly broke the woman all over again. "Dad says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Violet said. "It means you're trying to do the right thing anyway." Hannah covered her face again, but her sob now carried relief rather than despair. Kane placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. He met Hannah's eyes, steady, resolute, unflinching. "This changes everything," he said. "Tomorrow we take this to Helena. And then we take it to the court." But Hannah shook her head, voice barely audible. "Kane, you don't understand. They already know what I took. They're watching, and they won't let her survive this." The room went still. The storm outside pounded harder. Kane glanced toward the window, instincts sharpening his pulse, quiet but alert. Because Hannah wasn't just confessing. She was warning them. And somewhere out there, in the shadows behind rain-streaked glass, the people who built this conspiracy had just realized their carefully constructed lies were starting to unravel. The storm had not eased. By the time the clock crept past 200 a.m., rain still hammered the roof in relentless pulses, as though the sky itself was warning them of what was coming. The house lights were low. The world outside drowned in darkness, and every instinct Kane had honed over years in military legal service and the silent training that came before, it was whispering the same thing. Something is wrong. Hannah sat curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket Violet had brought her. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom, smaller than she had even an hour ago, like someone who had carried a secret for too long and now struggled to remember how to breathe without its weight. Kane stood by the front window, staring through a sliver in the blinds toward the empty street. He had turned off the porch light earlier, better to see without being seen. Behind him, Helena paced. She had arrived 20 minutes earlier, after Kane's urgent message here. Damp from the rain jacket, pulled tight expression carved from cold steel. When he opened the door, she knew immediately. "What happened?" she'd asked. Voice clipped. "Hannah came," Kane said, ushering her inside. "With evidence." Now she stood silent, absorbing everything Hannah had admitted, everything she had brought with her. Helena Vaughn rarely allowed emotion to surface, but the fire behind her eyes tonight was unmistakable. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Helena asked quietly. Hannah flinched at the softness in her tone. Softness always hurt more than anger. "Because they threatened my husband," she whispered. "They said if I didn't help them take you down, they'd ruin him. And I believed them. I had seen what they were doing to you, how fast they moved." She swallowed. I was terrified. Helena lowered herself onto the sofa beside her. "Fear doesn't make you weak, Hannah. It makes you human." A tear slipped down Hannah's cheek. "I'm so sorry, Colonel." Helena shook her head. "No. Save that for later. Right now, we need to keep you safe." Kane turned from the window. "That's the part I'm worried about." Helena stiffened. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned both women toward the dining table where he laid Hannah's satchel. The flash drive sat in the center, small and unassuming. "This," Kane said, tapping it lightly, "isn't just a threat to Vance's operation. It's a death sentence for it." "Meaning?" Helena asked. "Meaning he's desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also become dangerous." As if summoned by the words, a faint mechanical whine drifted through the storm. Helena's head snapped toward the window. "What was that?" Kane moved silently back to the blinds. He parted them an inch more. A dark SUV sat idling 2 houses down. Lights off. Engine running. No movement inside. To anyone else, it would look like a car caught in the storm. But Kane Hale wasn't anyone else. "They're here," he murmured. Hannah's breath hitched audibly. Helena straightened. "How many?" "Hard to tell," Kane replied. "2 at least, maybe 3. Hannah began to tremble again. Helena placed a steady hand over hers. Kane took a breath, calming the sharp edge inside him. "They're not coming in guns blazing," he said. "They don't want attention. They want to scare us, to see if Hannah runs, to see if they can flush out the evidence." Helena finished. Kane nodded. "Exactly." He crossed the room, checking the back door, the windows, the locks that suddenly seemed far too fragile. Violet's door stayed shut. She was fast asleep, untouched by the fear thickening the air. Helena watched him work her mind, snapping into tactical mode with the ease of a seasoned Marine. "We need to keep light discipline," she said. "No silhouettes in windows. No sudden movement outside." Kane smirked softly. "I see the Corps didn't train that out of you." Helena didn't smile back. "Whatever they're planning, they'll act before dawn. Fear works best in the dark." Hannah clasped her arms around herself. "What do we do?" Kane returned to the living room, expressions cool, deliberate. "We hold position, we stay quiet, and we wait long enough for them to realize we're not panicking." Hannah looked like she was trying not to fall apart. Helena rose. "I'll take the back windows. Kane, you keep eyes on the front." He nodded once, confirmation between equals. The storm raged on, drowning the world in white noise. Minutes passed, tense, motionless, until Violet's voice suddenly pierced the silence. Dad Kane pivoted instantly toward the hallway. Violet rubbed her eyes, wearing mismatched socks and holding her Fox backpack. "Why are the lights off?" Kane crouched to her level. "Just a little power saving tonight, kiddo." Violet looked past him toward the window, sensing the unease in the room. "Is someone outside?" Hannah gasped softly. Helena froze. Kane forced his voice steady. "Go back to your room, sweetheart, and stay there until I say otherwise." Violet hesitated. Then she hugged his leg tightly, an instinctual, wordless gesture, and slipped back into her room. When her door closed, Helena let out a slow breath. "She's perceptive." "Too perceptive," Kane murmured. Another sound, this one unmistakable. A click. Soft. Metallic. Helena's eyes widened. "Front walkway." Kane grabbed his phone, pulling up the security feed, but the screen flickered static. Violet had said it earlier. She had noticed. The cameras were offline. Kane's pulse hardened. They disabled the system. Helena straightened shoulders, squaring. "Then this isn't intimidation. This is preparation." The rain hammered harder, drowning movement, drowning footsteps, drowning danger. Kane moved toward the hall closet, not for a weapon. He didn't keep firearms in the house, not with Violet here, but for something more subtle. A tactical flashlight, heavy enough to function as a blunt tool if needed. Helena joined him, scanning the shadows. "If they break in, they'll go for Hannah first." "I know." Hannah pressed herself deeper into the corner, shaking uncontrollably. Then the sound they had all been waiting for and dreading. A hard rattle of the back doorknob, followed by silence. Helena's posture shifted into combat readiness. Kane lifted a hand quietly, signaling them not to move. A beat. Another. The storm swelled. Then Kane spoke low. "And certain. They're testing entry points. They want to see how fast we react." Helena's jaw tightened. "We won't give them what they want." Kane nodded, eyes sharp as steel. "Exactly." He glanced toward the hallway where Violet slept, and something in him changed. The protector, the soldier, the father, everything converged into a single, unbreakable line. He turned back to Helena. "They know we're inside," he said softly. "So we make sure they understand something else." "What's that?" she whispered. Kane's voice was calm, solid, the kind of tone that made enemies hesitate. "That this house," he said, "is defended." Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the drenched street, and the SUV still idling like a predator, waiting for the right moment. But inside, the balance had shifted. Vance's men thought they were approaching frightened prey. What they found instead was a Marine colonel, a brilliant fallen attorney, and a witness who had finally chosen truth over fear. The night was far from over, but so was the fight. And Kane Hale had just silently declared if they wanted to come any closer, they would have to go through him first. The storm finally began to thin around dawn, the relentless pounding easing into a tired drizzle as pale morning light crept across the Hale household. The night had felt endless hours, marked not by sleep, but by vigilance, silence, and the steady presence of danger just outside the walls. But by first light, the SUV was gone. No engine hum, no silhouettes behind tinted glass, just wet pavement and tire marks dissolving into the morning mist. Inside the house remained locked in hushed, exhausted quiet. Hannah had cried herself to sleep on the sofa sometime after 4. Helena stayed awake the entire night, watching the back door with a stillness only Marines understood. Kane never left the front window. The shadows beneath his eyes were deeper than before, but his gaze was sharp alert, even now. When Violet emerged from her room, she padded into the living room, holding her Fox backpack like a shield. She glanced at the adults, the fatigue, the tension, the remnants of fear lingering in their expressions. "Did the storm scare you too?" she asked softly. Helena knelt beside her. "A little," she admitted, smoothing a hand over Violet's hair. "It was a loud one." Violet nodded. "It's okay. Storms always go away when the sun comes." Kane felt something in his chest loosen at that, a truth so simple it almost felt like a message. But there was no time for sentiment. He turned to Helena. "We need to secure what Hannah brought before anyone realizes how much she actually knows." Helena nodded. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Hannah, still pale but awake now, sat up slowly. Her voice trembled. "The files I brought. They're dangerous." Kane crouched beside her. "So are the people who created them. But they made a mistake when they underestimated you." Hannah tried to smile, but her fear outweighed it. "I hope you're right." Kane inserted the flash drive into his laptop. A password prompt appeared, but Hannah leaned over and typed it in with shaking fingers. When the folders opened, the room seemed to grow colder. There were dozens, no hundreds of files. Encrypted message logs, financial transfers, surveillance directives, internal memos, altered records, access pathways, tampered timestamps, lists of targeted personnel. But one folder froze Helena in place. Containment orders level red. Kane clicked it open. 6 documents appeared, all classified, all stamped with contractor codes belonging to companies tied to Curtis Vance. The first document was a directive outlining risk mitigation protocols. The second listed personnel flagged as security obstacles. The third detailed narrative-shaping strategies for media leaks. But the fourth was the one that made Helena's breath stop. It bore a single heading: Priority Neutralization Targets. There were only 2 names. 1. Colonel Helena Vaughn. 2. Kane Hale. Silence slammed into the room. Hannah covered her mouth, horrified. "I didn't know your name was on it. I swear I didn't." Kane stared at the screen, expression unreadable. He had suspected he'd drawn attention the moment he stepped into Helena's case, but seeing it spelled out in a document stamped with federal coded authorization, that was different. That was commitment. Helena inhaled sharply. They listed you because of last night. Because you defended me. No, Kane said calmly. They listed me because I'm a problem. He clicked the fifth document. Threat response coordination. This one mapped out steps taken to secure cooperation from internal witnesses. One report detailed how Hannah had been approached. Another outlined false evidence placement. And another. Helena felt her stomach twist. That's the order to remove the email from my account, she whispered. They documented it like it was routine. Kane's jaw tightened. To them it is. Finally, he clicked the sixth document, a single audio file. Short, only 43 seconds. When it began to play, the blood in Helena's veins turned to ice. A man's voice, smooth, controlled, utterly devoid of conscience, spoke. Vaughn is step one. Remove her. Discredit her. Make it clean. If necessary, apply pressure to her support network. No loose ends. And the moment she breaks transition to Hale, he'll fall with her. Then another voice responded, a voice Helena recognized with dread. Understood, sir. It belonged to a commanding officer she had once trusted. The file ended. For several seconds, the only sound was the soft patter of rain outside. Helena felt like the ground beneath her had shifted. Everything she believed about her chain of command, her service, her loyalty, shattered. Colonel Kane said quietly, "Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his eyes, steady, grounded, refusing to let her fall into despair. This isn't your failure. This is their corruption. Helena swallowed hard. I never imagined I'd see something like this. Not in my own house. Not from my own people. Kane nodded. The greatest betrayals always come from those with power to hide them. Hannah wiped at her tears. Kane, there's more. There's another folder I couldn't decrypt, protected by a deeper layer. I think it holds the proof connecting Vance to the officers who helped frame Helena. Kane's expression hardened with purpose. Then that's our next step. But before he could open it, Helena placed a hand over his. Kane, you saw the neutralization list. If we keep going, we don't have a choice, Kane said softly. They came to my house last night. Helena, they threatened my daughter's safety. That makes this personal. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It became something sharper, deeper. Forged. Helena stared at him, seeing not the janitor, not the man forced out of the system years ago, but the legal warrior he once was, but fiercer, now fueled by a cause larger than revenge. You're not alone in this, Helena whispered, placing her palm over the file. Whatever comes next, we face it together. He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. A silent vow, a joining of battles and burdens. Then he looked back at the screen, at the encrypted folder, at the buried truth waiting to be unearthed. All right, Kane said quietly. Let's open the door they never wanted anyone to find. Outside, the sun finally pierced the clouds, thin and pale, but unmistakably there. Inside the Hale home, surrounded by danger exhaustion and a rising tide of courage, something began to shift between them. Not fear, not despair, but resolve. The kind that could topple empires. The federal courthouse felt different that morning. Charged humming as if the air itself sensed that something long buried was about to break the surface. Lawyers clustered in the hallways in hushed circles, their glances sharp and curious. Reporters hovered outside like vultures awaiting movement. Even the security guards stood a little straighter, their eyes following Kane and Helena as they walked toward courtroom 12B. But it wasn't the stairs that made Helena's pulse race. It was the folder in Kane's hand, thin, deceptively simple, yet heavy with the kind of truth that could shatter careers, expose corruption, and end lives. Hannah walked behind them, flanked by 2 federal officers Kane had quietly arranged protection with at dawn. She looked frightened but determined, a woman ready to reclaim her soul. "Remember," Kane murmured, stepping closer to Helena as they reached the courtroom doors. "Today isn't about fear. It's about exposing the seams they tried to hide." Helena nodded once, her expression steeled, but fragile at the edges. "What if they shut us down before we begin?" Hansa warmed with a calm she had come to rely on. "They can try." He pushed open the door. The room silenced instantly. Harper Knox waited at his table. Posture rigid, jaw tight. He no longer looked smug. He looked cornered, and behind his eyes was something darker, panic poorly disguised as indignation. When Kane and Helena took their seats, Knox leaned in and hissed across the aisle. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, Hale, but this ends today." Kane didn't even turn. "You're right," he said softly. "It does." The judge entered. "All rise." After the formalities, the judge settled an expression neutral, but alert. "Mr. Knox, the court is prepared to resume with your presentation of evidence." Knox stood gathering his papers with a quick, irritated shuffle. "Your Honor. While I am eager to proceed, I feel it is necessary to." Kane rose. "Your Honor, before the prosecution continues, the defense moves to admit newly recovered evidence that directly impacts the legitimacy of the charges." Knox's head snapped toward him. "Objection. Defense cannot." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Knox, I will hear the motion." Kane stepped forward, holding the thin folder like a blade hidden in plain sight. "This file contains internal communications timeline corrections, administrative logs, and directive memos that contradict the prosecution's narrative. Furthermore, we have reason to believe key evidence was intentionally altered or destroyed." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Knox slammed his hand on the table. "This is outrageous. The defense is accusing my office of misconduct without a shred of." Kane opened the folder. "We have more than a shred," he said quietly, but with a force that rolled through the room like thunder. He set a printed transcript on the judge's desk. "This is an internal directive signed by personnel tied to a private contractor, Curtis Vance. It outlines targeted actions meant to discredit Colonel Vaughn, manipulate evidence, and ensure her removal." The judge lifted the document, scanning rapidly. His expression changed, tightening, then darkening. Knox sputtered. "This is fabricated clearly, an attempt to mislead." "Your Honor," Kane said, voice smooth as tempered steel. "The defense also brings forward a witness who can authenticate the documents." He turned toward the gallery. "Hannah Keene, please come forward." Knox went pale. Hannah stepped up slowly, visibly trembling, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I testify that Colonel Vaughn did nothing wrong. I was instructed, pressured to provide false statements. These documents match the ones I was shown before my testimony." Pin drop silence. The judge stared over his glasses. "Keene, are you stating under oath that you were coerced?" "Yes." Hannah whispered. "By individuals working under the authority of Curtis Vance. They threatened my husband's employment. They said Colonel Vaughn was a threat to national stability and that cooperating was necessary to restore order. None of it was true." Knox lunged forward. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's retracting testimony under duress. She's clearly been manipulated by. "Sit down, Mr. Knox," the judge said sharply. Knox froze. Lips parted. Kane continued retrieving another sheet. This one, a screenshot of the missing email's deletion log. The defense also submits evidence showing a protected exonerating email from Colonel Vaughn's account was removed at the server level. Not by user action, by administrator override. Helena watched the judge's face tighten again. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for months: vindication. Kane handed the judge one final document, his coup de grace. "And lastly, Your Honor, we submit an audio file recovered from internal communications. It contains a directive ordering Colonel Vaughn to be neutralized professionally, reputationally, and, if necessary, personally. It also names secondary targets, including myself." Knox shot up again, voice cracking. "This is a breach of federal law. These are classified materials. You can't." Kane finally turned to him, calm as ever. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Knox. They are classified. Which raises one question." He paused. "How did your witnesses gain access to them?" "In the first place." Knox's voice died. The gallery stirred in disbelief. The judge exhaled slowly, deeply. Then he leaned forward, voice low and grave. "Mr. Knox, do you have any evidence to contradict the defense's claims?" Knox opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Kane returned to Helena's side, and for the first time since the start of the trial, she felt the oppressive weight around her shoulders lift. The judge folded his hands. "Given the severity of this new evidence, all charges against Colonel Helena Vaughn are hereby suspended pending independent review. Furthermore, this court will initiate inquiries into prosecutorial conduct, evidence tampering, and any actions taken by external contracting entities." The court stands adjourned. The gavel struck. It didn't echo. It cracked, like the first break in a dam. Helena's breath trembled not from fear, but from overwhelming relief. She turned to her janitor attorney, the man who had walked into a courtroom with a broom and left carrying her future in his hands. "Kane," she whispered, "you saved me." He shook his head. "No, Colonel. I just revealed the truth. The truth did the rest." Knox, defeated, sank into his chair, all bravado stripped away. Hannah leaned against the wall, crying softly, tears of guilt, of release, of redemption. And Helena Marine Colonel, accused traitor, broken and rebuilt in a single morning, felt a warmth she thought she'd never feel again. Hope. Real, living hope. She looked at Kane once more. "We're not finished, are we?" "No," Kane said quietly. This was just the reckoning. He picked up the thin folder of evidence, the weapon that would now be used to take down the man who orchestrated her fall. "The storm is coming for them now." And as Helena followed him out of the courtroom, she knew Curtis Vance had just made the two most dangerous enemies imaginable: a Marine with her honor restored, and a quiet hero who refused to let injustice stand. The sky over Arlington carried a strange electric stillness on the morning the storm finally broke. Not a storm of thunder or rain, but the kind that comes when truth collides with power. Inside the Hale living room, the remnants of a sleepless night still lingered: untouched mugs of coffee, scattered papers, and the heavy tension of anticipation. Helena stood near the window, dressed in her uniform again, her posture straight, but her jaw tight. The courtroom victory had been monumental, but she knew victories this public, this disruptive, rarely passed without retribution. And retribution was exactly what they were waiting for. Kane entered the room, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. "It's happening," he said quietly. Helena's breath caught. Vance Kane nodded. FBI moved in 15 minutes ago. Multiple units. Financial crimes, internal corruption, national security. They're raiding his headquarters and his private residence simultaneously. Hannah, sitting tensely at the kitchen table, gasped. Do they have enough evidence to hold him? Kane glanced at her. They have more than enough. The drive you gave us was only the beginning. Once they dug into Vance's internal servers, everything unraveled. Helena stepped closer. What about the officers involved? The ones who signed those directives. A federal warrant was issued for all named parties. Kane's eyes darkened. They're not walking away from this. For a moment, Helena closed her eyes. She had imagined this day countless times. Daydreams whispered in the dark corners of her mind when despair felt suffocating. A day when the system that betrayed her would finally turn on those who corrupted it. But now that it was here, it felt unreal. Turn on the news, Kane said. Hannah grabbed the remote with trembling hands and flicked on the television. The morning broadcast crackled to life, an aerial shot of Vance's mansion swarmed by agents. The reporter's voice rang out. In a stunning development, federal authorities executed a coordinated raid this morning on properties linked to defense contractor Curtis Vance. Investigators report the discovery of classified documents, falsified evidence logs, and financial trails, pointing to bribery and internal manipulation. Helena's pulse quickened. The charges include conspiracy to obstruct justice, evidence tampering, and placing military personnel under unlawful surveillance. Hannah covered her mouth, tears gathering again, but this time, tears of release, not guilt. Kane lowered the volume and looked to Helena. He's not getting out of this. But Helena wasn't looking at the screen. She was staring at Kane. There was something in his expression, a quiet, worn exhaustion mixed with triumph, that told her just how much of himself he had poured into this fight. Not for recognition, not for pride, but because he refused to let the world crush someone undeserving. A knock at the door startled all three of them. Kane's posture shifted instantly. Shoulders squared, senses sharpened. Helena reached for the nearest heavy object, instinctively ready for a threat. After the night they'd endured, caution had become second nature. Kane opened the door slowly. Two FBI agents stood outside, rain-speckled jackets and identification badges visible. "Mr. Hale?" the taller agent asked. "Yes, I'm Special Agent Whitaker. This is Agent Ruiz. We wanted to update you personally. Your report and testimony were instrumental in securing this operation." Kane nodded once. "Glad to hear it." Whitaker continued. "We have Vance in custody. He attempted to flee when the warrant was executed, but he didn't get far." His tone deepened. He had a suitcase with cash and a forged passport. He was planning to disappear. Helena stiffened. "Did he say anything?" The agent nodded. "Yes. When we apprehended him, he said, 'Tell Hale he's made a powerful enemy.'" The Kane exhaled through his nose, eyes steady. "He won't be an enemy for long. You have him." "We do," Whitaker replied. "And with what we found on his servers and the files your team uncovered, he'll be facing charges for the rest of his life." Helena stepped forward. "And his accomplices?" "Already in custody or being detained today," Ruiz said. "The chain of command was deeper than we expected, Colonel, but the digital trail was even deeper." Helena swallowed. "Thank you." The agents nodded and left. Kane closed the door behind them. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The quiet was too full of emotions, of relief, of disbelief. Then Helena walked to the window again, watching a cluster of reporters gather outside the courthouse far in the distance. "After everything they did to me," she said softly, "it feels strange to be free." Kane approached, standing beside her. "You earned your freedom, Helena. They tried to take it, but they forgot something important. She glanced at him. What that justice might bend, Kane said. But it doesn't break unless good people stop fighting. Her breath caught not because of the words, but because of the man saying them. Kane Hale, the quiet janitor, who wasn't a janitor. The father who fought with his mind instead of his fists. The man who stepped into a courtroom and reclaimed her life. Dad. Violet's soft voice drifted from the hallway. She rubbed her eyes sleepily. Is everything okay now? Kane lifted her into his arms. Yes, sweetheart. I think it finally is. Violet smiled drowsily, then looked at Helena. Does that mean she won't be sad anymore? Helena felt her heart clench. I think I'm going to be just fine, she said gently. Violet grinned, leaning her head on Kane's shoulder. Good. You're really brave. Helena laughed softly, a sound Kane hadn't heard from her yet. A sound unburdened by fear. Later that morning, as the sun finally broke through the gray clouds, Helena and Kane stepped out onto the courthouse steps. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out, cameras flashing. Colonel Vaughn. How does it feel to be vindicated? Mr. Hale, how did you discover the corruption? Did you expect this outcome? Is this the end of the investigation? Or just the beginning? Helena felt her breath hitch. Old instincts flaring the urge to withdraw. Rising. But Kane stepped forward, shielding her slightly from the chaos. His presence, a calm anchor in the frenzy. He faced the reporters with quiet authority. We didn't expect this outcome, he said. We just fought for truth. And truth has a way of surviving. The cameras clicked. The crowd hushed. Helena looked at Kane, and for the first time she allowed herself to smile, soft and full of gratitude. You saved my name, she whispered. Kane shook his head. No, Helena. You saved yourself. I just refused to let them bury you. Violet tugged Helena's sleeve gently, handing her a small violet flower she had plucked from a planter nearby. For you, she said, because today is a new day. Helena knelt, accepting it. Yes, she murmured, it is. Behind them, news outlets shouted, FBI agents escorted handcuffed officers into vans, and the world began rewriting its narrative. But for Helena and Kane, the storm had finally broken, and sunlight, rare, fragile, but real, was beginning to shine through. Spring arrived slowly in Arlington like a cautious guest, unsure if it was welcome. After months of gray skies, court battles, and long nights, the warmth finally began to settle, stretching across sidewalks, filling trees with new buds, easing itself into the quiet corners of life that had gone cold. Inside a modest office building on Wilson Boulevard, a new sign had just been mounted beside the front door. Hail and hail justice for the quiet ones. Kane stepped back, dusting his palms as he admired it. The letters gleamed in the morning sun. Clean, hopeful, determined. It wasn't a large office, but it was his. A place rebuilt from the pieces of a life once shattered, now reassembled with purpose. Behind him, Violet clapped. It's beautiful, Dad. He smiled and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. You think so? She nodded emphatically. It looks like it's telling people, come in if someone was unfair to you. Kane chuckled. That's actually exactly what it means. Violet beamed, as if she had invented the concept of justice herself. Inside the office smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. 2 desks, 1 bookshelf, a coffee maker already sputtering to life, and a small glass bowl of violet candies Violet had insisted on placing at the entrance. Clients need candy, she'd said confidently. Kane hadn't argued. He hung his suit jacket over the back of his chair, ready for the day's work, when the front door opened softly. He turned and paused. Helena Vaughn stood there, framed by the doorway, like a portrait of resilience. She wasn't in uniform today. Instead, she wore a simple white blouse and dark slacks, her hair pulled into a neat braid. Her face, once etched with strain, now carried a lightness he hadn't seen before. In her hands was a small bouquet of violets, fresh, delicate, wrapped in brown paper. "For you," she said gently, glancing between Kane and his daughter. "For both of you." Violet ran forward with excitement. "You brought us flowers." Helena knelt, offering her the bouquet. "These reminded me of your name, and how brave you were the night you helped your dad." Violet puffed her chest proudly. "I was helpful." "Very helpful," Helena said warmly. Kane watched the exchange, his heart softening in a way he wasn't prepared for. "Helena," he said, stepping closer, "you didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to," she replied. There was something in her eyes, a quiet gratitude mixed with something deeper, gentler. "I heard your office opened today. I thought it deserved a proper blessing." Kane smiled softly. "Then I'm honored you're here." Helena rose and placed the violets in a vase near the window. "How does it feel?" she asked. Being back. Officially, Kane breathed deeply, like stepping into sunlight after a very long night. She nodded, understanding more than most ever could. "You earned this, Kane," maybe he said with a half-smile. "But I wouldn't have gotten here without a certain Marine colonel refusing to let injustice stand." Helena gave him a look, half amused, half touched. "You defended me before I even knew how much danger I was in, and you stood beside me when I needed backup." He replied softly, "That makes us even." She held his gaze for a heartbeat too long before looking away. Violet tugged on Helena's sleeve. "Are you working here too?" Helena's cheeks warmed. "No, sweetheart. I'm starting a new job soon, training division." Kane looked up sharply. "You're really stepping back from active command." A gentle, thoughtful smile touched her lips. "After everything I realized, something power means nothing if it turns you into someone who forgets compassion. I want to help shape young Marines who understand that integrity isn't optional. It's the foundation." Kane's chest tightened, not with pain, but with admiration. "That suits you," he said. Helena's eyes softened. "I think so too." They spent the next hour arranging the office, placing books on shelves, organizing case files, and laughing whenever Violet insisted on adding her drawings to the bulletin board. One showed the three of them standing under a sun that took up half the page. "It's your team," she explained solemnly. "You need a picture of your team." Helena smiled. "Then we definitely need that." By noon, the office felt less like a workspace and more like a warm, courageous promise to anyone who would walk through the door. Kane brewed a fresh pot of coffee and handed Helena a steaming mug. Their fingers brushed lightly, a fleeting touch, but enough to send a quiet awareness between them. She held his gaze over the rim of the cup. "You look lighter," she said. "Maybe because the world finally feels right side up," he replied. Or maybe, she countered gently, "because you found your way back to what you were always meant to do." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned against the desk, studying her with the same careful attention he once gave to evidence files. "You know," he said finally when this all started, "I thought stepping into that courtroom again was a mistake. And now," he hesitated, voice softer. "Now I think it was the beginning of something I didn't realize I'd lost." Helena set her mug down. "Hope, hope," he echoed. A quiet moment lingered between them, warm, unhurried, filled with possibilities. Then Helena took a breath, her voice gentler than he'd ever heard it. "Kane, there's something I've been wanting to ask." He straightened slightly, heart ticking faster. "I've spent years being strong for everyone else," she said, softly. "Years convincing myself I didn't need anything beyond my duty. But you believed in me when no one else did. You helped me remember who I am." She looked at the violets in the vase, then back at him. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to walk forward with you and Violet. Not as a case, not as a burden, but as part of your lives." Kane's breath caught. Violet peeked up at Helena with bright hope. "You mean, like friends?" Helena smiled softly. "Yes, friends, unless your dad has other ideas." Kane's voice was warm enough to melt frost. "I think he said quietly that having you in our lives would be an honor." Helena's eyes glistened subtle, but undeniably touched. Violet clapped again. "So you'll come for dinner, and we can make spaghetti, and maybe you and Dad can." "Violet." Kane interrupted with a gentle laugh, one step at a time. Helena chuckled, something light and healing flowing through her. "Dinner sounds perfect." Kane nodded. Tonight, she replied, as the sun dipped lower, casting long golden streaks across the office floor. Helena stood beside Kane and Violet, a trio forged not by chance, but by courage, truth, and the quiet, powerful kindness that had saved them all. Outside, life moved on. Cars passed people, hurried down sidewalks, unaware of the miracle inside the small office. But for Kane, Hale, Helena Vaughan, and little Violet today marked more than justice, more than survival, more than redemption. It marked the beginning of something new, something worthy, something gentle, something strong enough to last. A future where broken things could be rebuilt, where hope wasn't a distant dream, but a living presence, where kindness, quiet, steady, unstoppable, had the final word. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Our community is filled with kind, thoughtful viewers from all over the world, and your presence truly matters here. If the story touched your heart, or reminded you that quiet courage still exists in this world, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories of hope, kindness, and second chances stories made for good people like you. Thank you sincerely for spending your time with us today. It's an honor to have you here, and we hope to see you again in the next story.